Have you ever wondered if historical bachelors were all just sad single dudes pining away in dusty rooms? Or were they actually living their best lives, challenging what society expected from them? Prepare to have your ideas about unwed historical men flipped on their head. Number 15. They were all sad and lonely. Hold up, because this idea of the perpetually gloomy bachelor just does not hold water when you look at history. We often picture historical bachelors as figures isolated from society, perhaps rocking gently in a chair, sighing wistfully about missed marital opportunities. But historical records and personal accounts show a very different picture. Many bachelors in history lived lives brimming with social connections, intellectual engagement, and community involvement that put the modern concept of loneliness to shame. They were not just surviving. They were often thriving within vast networks of friends, colleagues, and extended family. Consider the life of Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate Renaissance man. He never married, yet his life was a whirlwind of activity, collaboration, and constant human interaction. He maintained large studios in Florence, Milan, and Rome, which were not just workplaces but bustling hubs of creative energy. Young apprentices, aspiring artists, and seasoned collaborators constantly flowed through his doors, learning from him, assisting him, and engaging in lively discussions about art, science, and the world. Imagine the atmosphere in his workshop, the smell of paints and solvents, the chatter of voices, the scratching of quills, and the constant hum of intellectual curiosity. This was hardly a solitary existence. Leonardo traveled extensively, served powerful patrons like the Medici family and the King of France, and was deeply embedded in the intellectual and artistic elite of his time. His friendships were numerous and significant, providing him with companionship, intellectual stimulation, and emotional support. He exchanged ideas with mathematicians, engineers, and philosophers, participating in a vibrant cross-pollination of knowledge that defined the Renaissance. His final years were spent in France, living under the patronage of King Francis I, where he continued to host guests, work on his projects, and enjoy the company of those around him, including his devoted assistant, Francesco Melzi. To suggest such a figure was lonely ignores the rich tapestry of his daily life and the countless relationships that shaped his existence. His pursuit of knowledge and his artistic endeavors were often communal activities, involving many hands and minds. Then there's the case of Isaac Newton, another prominent historical bachelor. While he might be remembered for his intense focus and occasional reclusive nature, Newton was far from socially isolated in the way we might imagine a lonely person today. His world revolved around Cambridge University and, later, the Royal Society in London. As a professor at Trinity College, he was part of a tightly knit academic community. He had colleagues, students, and academic rivals with whom he constantly interacted, debating theories, sharing discoveries, and engaging in fierce intellectual contests. His voluminous correspondence shows a man deeply connected to the scientific discourse of his era, exchanging letters with leading minds across Europe. These letters were not just professional exchanges. They often contained personal touches, expressions of frustration or excitement, and the building of intellectual bonds. When he moved to London to become Master of the Royal Mint and President of the Royal Society, his social circle actually expanded dramatically. He hosted dinners, attended meetings, and played a leading role in a major intellectual institution. He was at the center of the scientific world, a figure of immense influence and respect. While he may have preferred quiet study, his life was punctuated by significant social and professional engagements that kept him connected and relevant. He had a reputation for being somewhat aloof, but this should not be confused with being isolated or friendless. His chosen path was one of intense intellectual pursuit, which often thrives in a shared environment of like-minded individuals. Furthermore, many historical bachelors found profound companionship and community within structured organizations like monasteries, scholarly guilds, or professional societies. For centuries, monastic life offered a legitimate and respected path for men who chose not to marry. These monks were celibate, yes, but they were by no means isolated. They lived in communal settings, sharing meals, prayers, work, and intellectual pursuits. A monastery was a self-sufficient community, a bustling microcosm where each member had a role, from gardening to copying manuscripts. There was a strong sense of brotherhood, shared purpose, and mutual support. These men found their emotional and social needs met within their religious families, dedicating their lives to spiritual and scholarly endeavors. They were surrounded by peers, engaged in structured routines, and often contributed significantly to the intellectual and cultural life of their regions. Their lives were defined by connection, albeit a different kind of connection than a marital one. Even outside of formal institutions, many historical bachelors maintained extensive social networks. In 18th and 19th century London, for instance, gentlemen's clubs became major social hubs. For men, especially those who were unmarried or temporarily separated from family, these clubs provided a home away from home. They offered dining rooms, libraries, reading rooms, and spaces for card games and conversation. Prominent bachelors often spent a significant portion of their days at these clubs, meeting friends, conducting business, and engaging in the social rituals of the day. They were places of lively discussion, gossip, and camaraderie. These clubs offered a structured and accepted avenue for social interaction, ensuring that unmarried men had ample opportunities for companionship and community engagement. The idea of a lonely bachelor pining away seems far-fetched when you consider the vibrant social scene available to many of these men. The concept of loneliness itself might be a more modern construct, focusing on emotional isolation rather than simply being unwed. In historical contexts, men who did not marry often had deep bonds with their extended families, siblings, nieces, and nephews. They might live with family members or frequently visit, becoming important figures in the lives of their relatives. They were integrated into their familial units, providing support and receiving it in turn. Their status as bachelors did not automatically condemn them to a life of solitude. Rather, it often allowed them to forge different, but equally strong forms of connection and belonging within their communities. Number 14. They never contributed to society. This is another huge misconception. The idea that historical bachelors were merely unproductive members of society, living only for themselves, is simply not supported by the vast amount of evidence. In fact, many unmarried men throughout history made monumental contributions across various fields, often because their bachelorhood allowed them a freedom and focus that married men might not have had. Their lack of direct domestic responsibilities sometimes freed them up to dedicate themselves entirely to their work, their studies, or their communities in ways that profoundly shaped the world. Think about the world of science and invention. Many of the greatest minds who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge were unmarried. Isaac Newton, whom we just discussed, is a prime example. His groundbreaking work in physics, mathematics, and optics laid the foundations for modern science. He developed the laws of motion and universal gravitation, invented calculus, and made significant discoveries about the nature of light and color. These are not small contributions. They are foundational pillars of our understanding of the universe. Imagine if Newton had been preoccupied with raising a family and managing a household. While it's impossible to say he wouldn't have achieved greatness, his bachelor status undoubtedly allowed him to pour an unparalleled level of uninterrupted focus and time into his intellectual pursuits. He could spend countless hours in solitary contemplation, conducting experiments and meticulously refining his theories without the constant demands of family life. His dedication was total. and his legacy is a testament to the immense societal value an unmarried individual could generate. Consider also the field of exploration and adventure. Many of history's most famous explorers were bachelors, or at least chose their expeditions over marital ties. Figures like Ferdinand Magellan, though briefly married before his final voyage, spent most of his adult life exploring the globe away from domesticity. His voyage was the first circumnavigation of the Earth, a feat that revolutionized geographical understanding and global trade routes. Or consider figures like Sir Ernest Shackleton, who, despite being married, was often away for years at a time on perilous Antarctic expeditions. While not strictly a bachelor in the modern sense, his life bears the commitment and single-mindedness often required for such endeavors, a path more easily trod by those not bound by immediate domestic ties. The freedom to embark on long, dangerous, and uncertain voyages, often for years at a time, was more readily available to men without wives and children dependent on their presence and income. These explorers expanded human knowledge, opened new trade routes, and literally redrew the map of the world. Their contributions were immeasurable. In the arts and literature, too, bachelors frequently left an indelible mark. Leonardo da Vinci, as we noted, was an unparalleled contributor to art, science, and engineering. His masterpieces like the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper continue to inspire awe centuries later. His anatomical drawings and engineering designs were centuries ahead of their time. His lack of a traditional family allowed him the mobility to pursue patronage across different city-states and nations, adapting his work to various cultural and political environments. He was a polymath, and his contributions were multifaceted and profoundly lil. Or think of the great philosophers and writers. Many of them dedicated their lives to thought and creation, often without marrying. Figures like Voltaire, though he had a long-term companion, never married, allowing him the freedom to travel, critique society, and produce an enormous body of work that challenged political and religious norms, contributing significantly to the Enlightenment. His sharp wit and prolific writing played a key role in shaping public opinion and intellectual discourse across Europe. Even in philanthropy and public service, bachelors often stood out. Many men of means who chose not to marry dedicated their wealth and time to charitable causes, founding institutions or supporting public works. Without direct heirs, their fortunes were often channeled into endowments for universities, hospitals, libraries, or museums. They became benefactors to entire communities, leaving legacies that continue to benefit countless individuals. Their lack of a nuclear family sometimes allowed them to view the broader society as their family. Investing their resources into the collective good, they helped build the very fabric of society, shaping educational opportunities, health services, and cultural institutions for generations to come. Their contributions were not just about money. They often involved active participation in the governance and development of these institutions, dedicating their time and expertise to public betterment. In the historical context, being a bachelor did not equate to being an unproductive member of society. Instead, for many, it provided a unique space for extreme dedication, focused innovation, and widespread societal impact. Their lack of marital and familial obligations, far from making them societal burdens, often empowered them to pursue ambitious projects and causes that benefited humanity on a grand scale. Number 13. They were all selfish. This stereotype paints historical bachelors as self-absorbed individuals, living only for their own pleasure and comfort, contributing nothing beyond their immediate desires. But just like the previous points, this is a vast oversimplification that ignores the complexity of human motivation and the diverse lives of historical bachelors. Many unwed men throughout history were deeply committed to serving others, whether through their professions, philanthropy, community involvement, or personal sacrifices for their loved ones. Consider the example of physicians and scientists who remained unmarried, dedicating their lives to healing or advancing knowledge for the benefit of humanity. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician from the 19th century, was a bachelor for much of his life and was fiercely dedicated to understanding and preventing puerperal fever, a deadly infection plaguing women after childbirth. He tirelessly advocated for hand-washing among medical staff, a practice that was revolutionary and met with significant resistance at the time. Despite facing professional scorn and personal hardship, he persisted because he believed in the immense public health benefit of his discovery. His unwavering commitment, often at great personal cost, saved countless lives and fundamentally changed medical practice. His work was not about personal gain. It was about alleviating suffering and improving public health on a massive scale. His focus and drive were intense, and his unmarried status likely allowed him to devote every ounce of his energy to this demanding, often frustrating cause. Think about teachers, scholars, and spiritual leaders who chose a life of celibacy, or simply remained unmarried, dedicating their lives to education and moral guidance. Many monks and priests, who were bachelors by vow, spent their lives educating the poor, caring for the sick, and preserving knowledge through difficult times. They ran schools, hospitals, and libraries, acting as the intellectual and social backbone of many communities during the Middle Ages and beyond. Their lives were structured around service to God and humanity, often involving significant personal austerity and sacrifice. They might spend their days teaching young novices, tending to the infirm in the monastery infirmary, or meticulously copying ancient texts, all for the betterment of society and the preservation of culture. This dedication was far from selfish. It was a profound act of selfless service. Beyond formal institutions, many bachelors displayed great acts of personal generosity and care. There are countless historical accounts of unmarried men who took on the responsibility of caring for elderly parents, infirm siblings, or orphaned nieces and nephews. In eras before comprehensive social welfare systems, these family bachelors often stepped into crucial roles, providing financial support, physical care, and emotional comfort to their relatives. They might forego personal ambitions or financial independence to ensure the well-being of their family members. This was not a selfish act. It was a profound demonstration of familial duty and love. Their unmarried status sometimes meant they were the only available person to take on such a burden, especially if siblings were married with their own families. Their sacrifices often went unsung, but they were vital to the survival and well-being of many households. Even in their professional lives, many bachelors were known for their generosity and mentorship. They might devote significant time to guiding younger colleagues, sharing their knowledge, or supporting apprentices without expecting direct personal benefit. For instance, many successful artists, craftsmen, or merchants who remained unmarried would take on numerous apprentices, investing deeply in their training and welfare, passing on their skills and ensuring the continuation of their crafts. This was a form of societal contribution that was deeply rooted in communal responsibility. They understood that the success of their trade or profession depended on the cultivation of new talent, and they were willing to invest their time and resources into it. The stereotype of the selfish bachelor often stems from a misunderstanding of what a fulfilling life looked like outside the traditional nuclear family structure. For many historical bachelors, fulfillment came from their contributions to their communities, their dedication to their work, or their care for their extended families. Their lives were often rich in purpose and service, proving that a lack of a spouse did not automatically equate to a lack of empathy or generosity. They show that selfishness is a character trait, not a marital status. Number 12. They were seen as a danger to society. This is a particularly harsh stereotype, suggesting that unmarried men were somehow inherently problematic, disruptive, or a threat to the established social order. While certain periods or cultures might have viewed bachelors with suspicion, especially if they were seen as avoiding their civic duties, or perpetuating a lack of heirs. The sweeping generalization that they were universally considered dangerous is far from accurate. In many contexts, bachelors were integral, respected, and even vital members of society. Let's consider the martial roles played by bachelors throughout history. Armies from ancient Roman legions to medieval knights to modern fighting forces have always relied heavily on young, unmarried men. These men were often considered ideal soldiers precisely because they lacked immediate family ties that might complicate their willingness to go to war, endure hardship, or make the ultimate sacrifice. They were seen as easier to deploy, more mobile, and perhaps more willing to take risks. Far from being a danger, they were essential for national defense and expansion. Societies actively encouraged and sometimes even mandated bachelorhood for periods of military service. A warrior class composed largely of bachelors was often seen as a source of strength and protection, not a threat. They were the ones upholding the peace, defending borders, and ensuring the safety of the very communities they were supposedly dangerous to. In the realm of exploration and adventure, bachelors were similarly essential. As mentioned before, the freedom from domestic responsibilities allowed many explorers to embark on perilous years-long voyages that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and geography. These expeditions, while risky, were seen as national endeavors, bringing prestige, resources, and strategic advantages. Imagine the logistical nightmare of fitting entire families onto tiny wooden ships for journeys into the unknown. The bachelors who manned these vessels or led these expeditions were celebrated heroes upon their return, not dangerous societal outliers. They were seen as courageous pioneering and ultimately beneficial to their nation's interests. Their willingness to face the unknown, often at great personal risk, was a sign of courage and dedication, not a sidereal threat. What about civic and political life? In many historical periods, particularly in early republics or democracies, bachelors were actively involved in local governance and national politics. Sometimes, their unmarried status was even seen as an advantage, suggesting they were less susceptible to nepotism or the pressures of familial obligations, allowing them to make decisions based solely on the public good. In ancient Rome, prominent bachelors often served in public office or military commands. In medieval towns, unmarried guild masters or wealthy merchants held significant power and influence. They contributed to the crafting of laws, the administration of justice, and the economic well-being of their communities. Their participation was often critical to the functioning of society, demonstrating their deep integration and positive influence. Of course, there were always anxieties about unmarried men, particularly if they were perceived as idle or prone to debauchery. Societies often valued marriage as a cornerstone of stability and procreation. This concern was rarely about inherent danger. It was more about social order and population growth. The danger was often framed as a potential for moral laxity or a failure to contribute to the next generation rather than a direct threat of violence or chaos. Laws imposing higher taxes on bachelors in some Roman and later European societies were an attempt to indipize marriage for population and military reasons, not because bachelors were inherently dangerous criminals. Furthermore, many bachelors were deeply rooted in their communities, participating in social clubs, religious organizations, and neighborhood activities. They were trusted friends, dependable neighbors, and respected figures in their local areas. The idea that they were a generalized danger ignores the vast majority of historical bachelors who lived peaceable, productive lives integrated within the social fabric. They were shopkeepers, craftsmen, scholars, artists, and laborers who contributed to the daily functioning and cultural richness of their societies. The stereotype of the dangerous bachelor is largely a misrepresentation. failing to recognize the diverse roles and essential contributions of unmarried men throughout history. Number 11. They avoided domestic responsibilities. This stereotype paints a picture of historical bachelors as utterly helpless around the house, unable or unwilling to cook, clean, or manage a household, constantly relying on others to do their bidding. While it's true that in many historical periods, domestic labor was often delegated to women or servants, this does not mean bachelors were entirely inept or always avoided all forms of domestic responsibility. Their living arrangements and class status often dictated their involvement, and many bachelors managed their own lives quite capably, often out of necessity. Consider the vast number of historical bachelors who lived independently, especially those of more modest means. Craftsmen, a shopkeeper, or a laborer living alone in a small apartment or lodging certainly could not afford a retinue of servants. These men were necessarily self-sufficient. They would have cooked their own simple meals, washed their own clothes, cleaned their own living spaces, and managed their own meager finances. Their domestic skills might not have been those of a master chef or a meticulously organized housekeeper, but they were certainly capable of maintaining a functional home. Survival demanded it. They learned to mend clothes, light fires, prepare basic provisions, and keep their immediate surroundings in order. This practical competence was a fundamental part of daily life for most people, married or not. The image of a slovenly bachelor, utterly lost without a woman, is often a caricature, not a reality for the average working man. Even for bachelors of higher social standing, their domestic arrangements varied widely. While wealthy bachelors might employ housekeepers, cooks, and valets, they still often had significant oversight responsibilities. They managed budgets, hired and fired staff, dealt with suppliers, and maintained the overall smooth running of their large households. This was a form of domestic responsibility, albeit from a managerial perspective. They weren't necessarily scrubbing floors, but they were certainly involved in the complex logistics of running a substantial establishment. For example, a lord or a wealthy merchant bachelor residing in his ancestral home would have been keenly aware of the daily operations, the estate's finances, and the welfare of his tenants and staff. Their role was one of management and stewardship, demanding a different but no less significant set of organizational and administrative skills. Furthermore, many historical bachelors lived in shared accommodations, such as with family members, fellow students, or other unmarried men. In such arrangements, responsibilities were often divided. If living with siblings, a bachelor brother might contribute financially, assist with heavy chores, or take on specific tasks like managing the family farm accounts. In a shared lodging with other students or professionals, they might take turns with cooking or cleaning, or pool resources to hire minimal help. This collaborative living demonstrates a willingness to engage with domestic duties, even if not performing every task solo. They were part of a functioning household unit and contributed to its maintenance in various ways, often in proportion to their skills and available time. The stereotype also ignores the historical context of gender roles. While women were primarily responsible for domestic labor, men often had specific, traditionally male, domestic duties. This could include chopping firewood, maintaining the structural integrity of the home, performing repairs, or managing the household's outdoor spaces like gardens or stables. A bachelor living independently or in a shared dwelling would certainly have had to manage these aspects of his home. He might not have been sewing clothes, but he was likely fixing a leaky roof or mending a broken fence. These were essential domestic responsibilities that kept a home functioning. In conclusion, while the division of labor in historical households was often gendered, to suggest that all historical bachelors utterly avoided domestic responsibilities is an oversimplification. Many were self-sufficient out of necessity. Others managed complex households through oversight, and many more contributed to shared living spaces. Their lives demonstrate a practical engagement with the necessities of home management, often tailored to their circumstances and social standing. The helpless bachelor image is more a trope than a universal historical reality. Number 10. They were always dependent on family. The stereotype portrays historical bachelors as perpetually tied to their family homes, unable or unwilling to forge an independent path, forever reliant on the financial or social support of their parents or siblings. While some bachelors certainly did live with family for practical or cultural reasons, many others were remarkably independent, building their own lives, careers, and financial security away from their familial origins. Independence was often a matter of circumstance, not a universal bachelor trait. Think about the entrepreneurs, merchants, and adventurers who struck out on their own. Many men, unmarried or not, left their hometowns to seek their fortunes in bustling cities, new colonies, or distant lands. A young man, often unmarried, might apprentice in a trade in another city, live independently in lodgings, and gradually build his own business. These individuals were far from dependent. They were self-starters, taking risks and carving out their own niches through sheer hard work and determination. They might send money back home, but they were certainly not living off their family's largesse. For instance, a man who became a successful textile merchant in 17th century London, having arrived from a small village, would have established his own household, managed his own finances, and built his own network of connections entirely independent of his family's direct support. His success was a product of his own ambition and industry. Consider also the vast number of men who pursued careers that required them to live away from their families. Soldiers, sailors, explorers, and many professionals, like engineers, surveyors, or government officials, often had to relocate for their work. These bachelors established independent residences, managed their own incomes, and navigated new social environments without the constant oversight or assistance of their families. A civil engineer working on a major construction project in a distant province, for example, would have lived in temporary lodgings, managed his own finances, and been entirely self-reliant. His independence was a direct consequence of his professional choices, not a result of marriage. In professions that demanded intellectual rigor and long periods of study, such as scholars, scientists, or philosophers, bachelors often found independence through academic appointments or patronage. Figures like Isaac Newton, as discussed, moved to Cambridge and lived independently as a scholar for decades. While his early education might have received some family support, his adult life was defined by his own intellectual pursuits and professional achievements, leading to significant financial and social autonomy. He earned his own living, managed his own affairs, and made his own decisions, entirely independent of his extended family's day-to-day involvement. He was a self-made scholar in many respects. Even for bachelors who did live with family, the nature of their dependence was often more nuanced than simple reliance. Sometimes, it was a mutually beneficial arrangement. An unmarried son might contribute significantly to the household income or provide essential labor on a family farm or business. He might take on the role of carer for aging parents, thereby becoming the family's support system rather than a burden. In some cultures, it was common for unmarried adults to remain within the extended family unit, but their presence was often an asset, providing additional hands, income, or social stability. For example, an unmarried uncle might be a central figure in a multi-generational household, offering wisdom, financial contributions, or simply providing additional adult presence and support. The stereotype of universal dependence ignores the diversity of economic and social circumstances for historical bachelors. Many were self-made individuals who chose their own paths, built their own careers, and managed their own lives with impressive autonomy. Their single status sometimes facilitated this independence, allowing them greater mobility and flexibility to pursue opportunities wherever they arose. free from the ties that might bind the married man to a particular place or set of responsibilities. Independence, for many bachelors, was a defining characteristic of their lives, not an absence. Number 9. They never experienced love. This is perhaps one of the most emotionally charged stereotypes, implying that a life without marriage is a life devoid of love, passion, and deep connection. This simply isn't true. To suggest that historical bachelors never experienced love is to fundamentally misunderstand the multifaceted nature of human affection and intimacy. Love exists in many forms beyond the marital bond, and historical bachelors frequently found profound love in their lives through various relationships. Consider the powerful bonds of friendship. Throughout history, deep, abiding friendships between men were highly valued and often celebrated. These were not mere acquaintances, but relationships characterized by loyalty, mutual support, shared intellectual pursuits, and often profound emotional intimacy. Ancient Greek philosophers like Plato wrote extensively about the ideal of male friendship, considering it a noble and virtuous form of love. In later periods, figures like Michel de Montaigne and Étienne de la Boétie shared a legendary friendship, described by Montaigne as so complete that their souls mingled and confounded themselves one in the other. While their relationship was not romantic in the modern sense, it was clearly one of deep love and connection, influencing each other's lives and thought profoundly. Many historical bachelors cultivated such friendships, which provided them with companionship, emotional fulfillment, and a sense of belonging that was every bit as real and important as marital love. These friends supported each other through hardship, shared triumphs, and engaged in deep, meaningful conversations that enriched their lives. Then there is the love for family, particularly for parents, siblings, nieces, and nephews. As mentioned earlier, many bachelors took on significant caregiving roles for their families. This act of care often stemmed from profound love and devotion. An unmarried son might tirelessly care for his aging parents, dedicating years to their comfort and well-being. An uncle might play a crucial loving role in the upbringing of his nieces and nephews, offering guidance, affection, and support. These familial bonds were often exceptionally strong and provided immense emotional satisfaction. The love within a family unit, even without a spouse or children of one's own, could be a powerful driving force and a source of immense personal fulfillment. These bachelors were loved, and they gave love generously to those around them. What about romantic love outside of marriage? While societal norms often pushed for marriage, romantic relationships, sometimes long-lasting and deeply loving, certainly existed without the formal institution of matrimony. This could be due to social obstacles, financial constraints, or personal choice. Historical records offer glimpses of unmarried men forming profound, passionate connections with companions, sometimes for decades. For instance, the renowned French philosopher and writer Voltaire, though never married, had a lifelong intellectual and romantic partnership with Émilie du Châtelet. Their relationship was characterized by deep intellectual exchange, mutual respect, and evident affection. While not a marriage in the legal sense, it was a loving partnership that sustained both individuals and produced significant philosophical work. Love, in its romantic form, was not exclusively confined within the bounds of marriage, and bachelors were just as capable of experiencing it, even if their expressions of it didn't always fit conventional societal. Furthermore, many bachelors found immense love and passion in their chosen vocations or avocations. The love for knowledge, for art, for a particular craft, or for a cause could be all-consuming and deeply fulfilling. A scientist who dedicates his life to unraveling the mysteries of the universe, or an artist who pours his soul into his creations, is experiencing a form of profound love and dedication. This passion, while not interpersonal, provided meaning, purpose, and a deep connection to something larger than themselves. It was a love that shaped their identity and provided a source of immense joy and satisfaction. To state that historical bachelors never experienced love is to diminish the rich tapestry of human connection and emotion. It ignores the deep bonds of friendship, the profound familial affections, the often unacknowledged romantic partnerships, and the consuming passion for work or purpose that define the lives of countless unmarried men throughout history. Love, in its diverse forms, was an undeniable part of their human experience. Number 8. They were seen as society. This stereotype suggests that historical bachelors were universally marginalized, stigmatized, and excluded from mainstream society, viewed as abnormal or undesirable. While there were indeed periods and cultures where unmarried status, especially for men of a certain age, could carry a social disadvantage or even lead to some suspicion, portraying them as outright outcasts is a gross oversimplification, and often respected positions within various societies. In many historical contexts, bachelorhood was a common and accepted life stage, particularly for young men establishing themselves before marriage. Apprentices, journeymen, students, and soldiers were often unmarried by necessity or custom, and they were vital components of the social and economic fabric. They were integrated into guilds, military units, educational institutions, and urban communities. Their unmarried status did not make them outcasts. It was simply a temporary condition or a chosen path within a specific social role. These men were active participants in their trades, their social circles, and their local economies. Furthermore, certain professions or lifestyles actually benefited from or even required bachelorhood, leading to bachelors being highly respected rather than ostracized. As previously noted, religious orders often required celibacy, and monks, priests, and friars were not outcasts but revered spiritual leaders, scholars, and caregivers in their communities. They held a significant moral authority, intellectual prestige, and social influence. Their unmarried status was a sign of their dedication to a higher calling, not a mark of social failure. Similarly, court eunuchs in some Eastern empires, though an extreme example, were often unmarried and held immense power and influence within the imperial structure, far from being marginalized. In periods of empire building, exploration, or military expansion, bachelors were often highly valued as pioneers, soldiers, and administrators in far-flung territories. They were the ones willing to leave behind settled society, endure hardship, and establish new outposts or trade routes. These men were seen as essential for national growth and prestige, often celebrated upon their return or admired for their contributions in distant lands. Their single status facilitated their mobility and dedication to these demanding roles, making them assets rather than outcasts. Even in more settled societies, wealthy or influential bachelors could hold considerable social sway. Landed gentry who remained unmarried might still be prominent figures in their local communities, patrons of local institutions, or active in regional politics. Their social standing often derived from their wealth, lineage, or professional achievements, not their marital status. A successful merchant bachelor in a bustling port city might be a respected figure in the business community, a member of prestigious clubs, and a benefactor to local charities. His lack of a wife did not diminish his social standing. His economic power and civic engagement were far more defining characteristics. Of course, societal attitudes could vary. In certain agricultural societies focused heavily on lineage and procreation, an older bachelor might be viewed with some pity or seen as not fulfilling the fundamental societal expectation. However, this was often more about social pressure to marry and procreate than about outright ostracism or the perception of them as inherently dangerous or unworthy. They might face gentle teasing or concerned questions from relatives, but rarely outright exclusion. The historical reality is that bachelors were deeply woven into the fabric of society, occupying diverse roles from the highest echelons of power and scholarship to the most humble of laborers. Their unmarried status was one characteristic among many, and it rarely defined them as universal outcasts. They were often indispensable contributors, respected professionals, and integrated members of their communities, demonstrating that social acceptance was not solely contingent on marital status. Number 7. They were all elderly. This stereotype suggests that historical bachelors were primarily older men who had missed their chance at marriage, implying a life of regret or stagnation. This is a common misconception that ignores the significant number of young men who were bachelors by necessity, choice, or temporary circumstance, as well as the thriving lives of older bachelors who were far from over the hill. First, it's crucial to remember that for the vast majority of historical periods, marriage was often delayed until men had achieved a certain level of financial stability. This meant that a significant portion of the male population in their late teens, 20s, and even early 30s were bachelors. They were not elderly by any stretch of the imagination. They were young adults, often actively building careers, serving apprenticeships, or seeking opportunities. For instance, in 17th century England, the average age of first marriage for men could be as high as the mid to late 20s. This meant that millions of young men were bachelors, energetically engaged in work, social life, and preparing for their futures. They were the backbone of the labor force, the aspiring professionals, and the young adventurers. Their bachelor status was a normal, temporary stage of life, not a sign of advanced age. Consider the young soldiers who made up the bulk of armies throughout history. They were typically unmarried men in their late teens and 20s, far from elderly. Their bachelor status made them ideal candidates for military service due to their physical vigor and fewer familial ties. They were at the peak of their physical capabilities, ready to face the rigors of combat and long deployments. These men were bachelors by circumstance, their youth and lack of family making them suitable for military life. Their contribution to society was immediate and essential, and they were certainly not old. What about students and scholars? Many men pursuing higher education or dedicating themselves to a lifetime of intellectual inquiry remained unmarried for extended periods, or even their entire lives. Figures like Isaac Newton, as discussed, spent decades as a bachelor while pursuing his groundbreaking scientific work. He was not an elderly bachelor when he made many of his most significant discoveries. His unmarried status allowed him the freedom and focus for intense study and research. Similarly, many university dons and professors in past centuries remained unmarried, dedicating their lives to academia. They were bachelors, yes, but often vibrant, intellectually active, and far from being seen as old and decrepit. Their age was often irrelevant to their status as bachelors. It was their dedication to their profession that dictated their marital status. Even among older bachelors, the stereotype of them being necessarily decrepit or stagnant is false. Many older unmarried men remained active, engaged, and productive members of society well into their senior years. They might be respected professionals, successful merchants, influential philanthropists, or beloved uncles within their extended families. Their lives continued to be full of purpose, companionship, and contribution. An older bachelor might have a well-established network of friends, a comfortable home, and the freedom to pursue hobbies or interests that married men with family obligations might not have. Their later years could be a time of leisure, continued learning, or quiet contribution to their communities. The stereotype of the elderly bachelor often projects modern anxieties about aging and being single onto historical figures. In reality, bachelorhood encompassed a vast age range from vibrant young men just starting out to older, well-established individuals living fulfilling lives. Age was just one variable in a complex tapestry of reasons and circumstances that led a man to remain unmarried, and it certainly did not define the totality of their experience. Number 6. They were obsessed with finding a wife. This stereotype suggests that historical bachelors were consumed by a singular, desperate quest for a wife, their lives defined by a yearning for matrimony above all else. While marriage was indeed a central societal institution, and many men desired it, to claim obsession for all bachelors is a misrepresentation of their diverse motivations and life priorities. Many bachelors had very different goals and aspirations, and their unmarried status was often a result of these other pursuits, not a failure in their hunt for a spouse. Consider the men who dedicated their lives to religious vocations. Priests, monks, and other clergy in many faiths vow celibacy, explicitly choosing a life without marriage for spiritual reasons. Their entire existence is geared towards service to God or their religious community, and the pursuit of a spouse would be a direct contradiction of their chosen path. They are not obsessively looking for a wife. They are obsessively pursuing spiritual enlightenment or divine service. Their focus is elsewhere, and their unmarried status is a deliberate, conscious choice rooted in deep faith and commitment. Their lives are defined by their spiritual mission, not a longing for a spouse. Think about the men who pursued careers requiring intense dedication and often solitude, like scientists, inventors, or philosophers. Isaac Newton, for example, poured an almost unparalleled level of energy into his scientific investigations. His pursuit of knowledge was his consuming passion. While he certainly interacted with others, his primary focus was on understanding the universe, developing mathematical principles, and conducting experiments. It is highly unlikely that he was secretly obsessed with finding a wife while he was busy inventing calculus or discovering the laws of gravity. His intellectual pursuits were his driving force, and his bachelor status allowed him the uninterrupted focus these monumental tasks required. Many other brilliant minds similarly monetized their intellectual work above forming a family. What about artists and writers who dedicated their lives to their craft? Leonardo da Vinci, as we've mentioned, was endlessly absorbed in his artistic and scientific endeavors. His notebooks overflow with ideas, sketches, and observations, reflecting a mind constantly engaged with the world around him. His life was a testament to creative passion. It is highly improbable that such a driven individual, constantly innovating and creating, was primarily focused on finding a wife. His art was his life, and his personal relationships, while important, were secondary to his creative output. Many artists, poets, and musicians throughout history lived similarly dedicated lives, their art becoming their primary focus and source of fulfillment. Moreover, economic and social circumstances often dictated marriage more than personal desire. In many historical periods, marriage was a pragmatic institution tied to land inheritance and social status. Some men might have been unable to afford marriage, or found themselves in social strata where suitable partners were scarce. For these individuals, bachelorhood might have been an economic reality rather than a personal choice, and their focus would have been on survival work or supporting their existing family, not an elusive search for a wife they couldn't afford. They were more concerned with putting food on the table than finding a spouse. Finally, some men simply did not feel compelled to marry. Just as in modern times, not every individual is driven by the desire for a marital partner. Some might have preferred their independence, valued their freedom, or found fulfillment in other aspects of their lives, such as friendships, hobbies, or community service. To assume a universal obsessive desire for marriage among all bachelors is to impose a monolithic view on a diverse group of individuals with varied personalities, ambitions, and priorities. Their lives were shaped by a multitude of factors, and the presence or absence of a wife was often a consequence of those factors, rather than the singular driving force of their existence. Number 5. They had no social life. This stereotype suggests that historical bachelors were solitary figures, devoid of social interaction, spending their days in quiet isolation. This is an incredible misrepresentation. In reality, many historical bachelors had incredibly rich and vibrant social lives, often participating in distinct social circles and institutions that catered to their unmarried status. Their social lives simply took different forms than those of married men. Consider the role of public houses, taverns, and coffee houses throughout history. These establishments were not just places to drink. They were vital social hubs, especially for men. In 18th century London coffee houses were centers of intellectual debate, news dissemination, and social networking. Many bachelors spent hours there discussing politics, literature, and business, forging connections, and enjoying lively conversation. They were integral parts of the social fabric, acting as informal clubs where men could meet, exchange ideas, and build reputations. Similarly, taverns served as community gathering spots where locals, including bachelors, would meet after work, share stories, and engage in games or music. These were not solitary pursuits. They were highly social activities that fostered camaraderie and connection. As mentioned before, gentlemen's clubs in the 18th and 19th centuries were practically a second home for many bachelors of means. These exclusive clubs provided a sophisticated social environment, complete with dining rooms, libraries, card rooms, and lounges. Members, many of whom were unmarried, would spend their days socializing, networking, and relaxing in the company of like-minded individuals. These clubs were bustling with activity, a constant flow of conversation and the forging of lifelong friendships and professional alliances. They provided a structured and elegant setting for bachelors to enjoy a robust social life, often far more active than many married men confined to their domestic spheres. Beyond formal institutions, many historical bachelors were deeply integrated into their communities through various informal social networks. They participated in local guilds, fraternal organizations, sporting clubs, or volunteer groups. Bachelor craftsman might spend his evenings at the guild hall, discussing trade matters and socializing with fellow members. An unmarried member of a local militia or fire brigade would spend significant time training, drilling, and socializing with his comrades. These groups fostered a strong sense of belonging and provided regular opportunities for social interaction and shared activities. They were central to a man's identity and provided a robust social calendar. Furthermore, many bachelors maintained extensive social ties with their extended families. They might frequently visit siblings, nieces, and nephews, becoming beloved uncles or trusted advisors. They could be central figures in family gatherings and celebrations, providing a different kind of social contribution and receiving affection in return. While not a nuclear family, these extended family networks offered constant social engagement and emotional support. Think of bachelor artists, writers, and intellectuals who formed vibrant coteries or salons. In cities like Paris and London, these groups would meet regularly to discuss ideas, critique art, and simply enjoy each other's company. These were highly stimulating social environments, often filled with lively debate, wit, and creative energy. Many bachelors thrived in these circles, finding intellectual companionship and deep personal connections that fueled their work and enriched their lives. To assume that a lack of a wife meant a lack of a social life is to narrowly define social life as exclusively marital or familial. Historical bachelors often had incredibly rich and diverse social lives, interacting with friends, colleagues, and community members in a multitude of ways. They were far from isolated. They were often at the very heart of the social whirl, participating in and shaping the cultural landscape of their times. Their social lives were different, but no less vibrant or fulfilling. Number 4. They were slovenly and unkempt. This stereotype paints historical bachelors as perpetually messy, unhygienic, and indifferent to their appearance, living in squalor. This is another harmful generalization that ignores the realities of daily life, social expectations, and personal pride. While individual cleanliness varied widely across all demographics in history, the idea that bachelors were universally slovenly is simply not true. Many historical bachelors were quite particular about their appearance and living conditions, especially those of a certain social standing or profession. First, let's consider the social expectations of appearance in different historical periods. For men of any social standing, being well-dressed and presentable was often important for business, social interaction, and maintaining respect. A merchant would need to appear trustworthy and prosperous to attract clients. A gentleman would need to maintain an impeccable appearance to move within polite society and uphold his reputation. A soldier or public servant would need to maintain a disciplined and neat appearance as part of his professional duty. These expectations applied to bachelors just as much as to married men. Many bachelors of means would employ valets or servants to assist with their elaborate wardrobes, ensuring their clothes were clean-pressed and fashionable. They would shave, groom their hair, and use perfumes or pomades, common for the era. The dandy or fop, often a bachelor, was someone hyper-focused on his appearance, not someone who neglected it. Even for bachelors of more modest means, practical considerations and personal pride played a role. A working man, such as a craftsman or laborer, might not have had fine clothes, but he would often strive for cleanliness and neatness within his means. He would wash his clothes, bathe when possible, and keep his living space tidy enough to be functional. In many historical communities, personal hygiene, though different from modern standards, was practiced daily. Water was fetched, clothes were scrubbed, and homes were swept. For a bachelor, living alone or sharing a small lodging, maintaining a degree of order was essential for comfort and health. The image of a man living amidst filth is more of an extreme caricature than a common reality for the average bachelor. Furthermore, many historical bachelors lived in communal settings where slovenliness would not have been tolerated. In military barracks, discipline and cleanliness were often strictly enforced for public health and morale. In monasteries, communal living demanded order and cleanliness from all members. In student lodgings or shared professional quarters, roommates would likely establish basic rules for tidiness and hygiene. To be an outlier in such environments would often lead to social disapproval or direct intervention from others. These shared living situations often enforced a baseline level of cleanliness that would prevent anyone from being truly slovenly. What about the idea of personal care and grooming? Historical records and portraits show that men of all marital statuses took pride in their hair, beards, and overall presentation. From elaborate wigs in the 17th century to carefully styled facial hair in the 19th, male grooming was a significant aspect of personal expression. A bachelor was no less likely to engage in these practices than a married man. In fact, for a man who might be actively seeking a partner or simply engaging in social life, neglecting one's appearance would be counterproductive. Of course, there were always individuals who neglected personal hygiene or lived in disarray, just as there are today. But this is a matter of individual habit and personality, not a universal trait of unmarried men. The stereotype of the slovenly bachelor is a convenient fictional trope, often used to contrast with the supposed domestic bliss and order of a married household. In reality, historical bachelors, like all people, varied widely in their personal habits, and many were quite fastidious and well-maintained. Number 3. They were commitment phobes. This stereotype paints historical bachelors as men inherently afraid of commitment, specifically to marriage, suggesting an aversion to responsibility, long-term relationships, or settling down. While some individuals might indeed have had such tendencies, to label all historical bachelors as commitment phobes is a sweeping generalization that ignores the numerous and varied reasons why men remained unmarried, many of which had nothing to do with an inherent fear of long-term bonds. Firstly, many men did not marry due to genuine economic or social barriers, not an aversion to commitment. In many historical societies, marriage was an expensive undertaking requiring a man to demonstrate financial stability, provide a dowry or bride price, or establish a household. For men of modest means, these prerequisites could be insurmountable. They might have desired marriage and companionship, but were simply unable to afford it. Their single status was a matter of practical impossibility, not a psychological phobia. They were committed to survival, their work, or supporting their families, which often precluded the financial commitment of marriage. Secondly, some men chose bachelorhood due to a deep commitment to other callings or passions. As discussed, religious vows of celibacy for priests and monks are the ultimate example of a commitment to a life beyond marriage. These men were deeply committed to their faith, their spiritual communities, and their service to humanity. Their commitment was not absent, it was simply directed elsewhere, in a manner that precluded marital ties. Similarly, scholars, artists, scientists, and explorers often dedicated their lives to their work with an intensity that left little room for domestic responsibilities. Their commitment was to their craft, their discoveries, or their adventures. This single-minded devotion often led to profound contributions to society, demonstrating that commitment was very much present in their lives, just not in the traditional marital form. Thirdly, societal expectations and opportunities varied. In some historical periods, a bachelor lifestyle, especially for wealthy or aristocratic men, might have been seen as a legitimate and even desirable path. It allowed for greater personal freedom, mobility, and the pursuit of political or social influence without the complexities of familial obligations. These men might have been deeply committed to their careers, their social circles, or their political ambitions, seeing marriage as a potential hindrance rather than a desirable outcome. Their choice was often an affirmation of a different kind of life, one that still involved significant commitment to chosen endeavors. Furthermore, many bachelors had long-term, committed relationships that simply weren't formalized through marriage. These could be deep friendships, long-term companionships, or even non-traditional romantic partnerships. While not legally recognized as marriage, these relationships often involved profound loyalty, shared lives, and mutual support, demonstrating a clear capacity for commitment. To deny their existence or validity because they didn't fit the societal mold of marriage is to ignore the diverse forms that human connection and commitment can take. The philosopher Voltaire's relationship with Émilie du Châtelet mentioned earlier was a deeply committed partnership, despite not being a marriage. Finally, the term commitment phobe is a modern psychological concept that is often anachronistically applied to historical figures. It assumes a specific psychological aversion that may not have been present or even understood in historical contexts. The reasons for remaining unmarried were far more complex and varied than a simple fear. They could be economic, social, professional, religious, personal, or circumstantial. To reduce all historical bachelors to this one psychological label is to simplify and misrepresent the rich diversity of their lives and choices. many of which demonstrated profound commitment to aspects of life other than marriage. Number 2. They were financially struggling. This stereotype often suggests that historical bachelors were inherently poor or financially unstable, unable to support a family or even themselves, leading to their unmarried status. While poverty was a significant reason for many men remaining unmarried throughout history, this was far from a universal truth. Many historical bachelors were incredibly wealthy, financially secure, and even immensely prosperous, wielding significant economic power and managing vast fortunes. Their unmarried status often reflected choice circumstance or a strategic advantage, not financial destitution. Consider the wealthy aristocrats and landed gentry who remained unmarried. Some of these men inherited vast estates, titles, and significant wealth. Their bachelor status might have been due to a lack of suitable heirs, a personal choice, or a dedication to other pursuits. They lived lives of immense privilege and luxury, managing extensive properties, investments, and servants. Their financial stability was unquestionable, and their unmarried status certainly did not indicate a struggle. Rather, it often signified a freedom to enjoy their wealth without the immediate obligations of raising a family or managing a large household. For example, a lord with a large estate might choose not to marry if his line was already secure through a nephew, or if he preferred to dedicate his time to politics or travel, all while being incredibly rich. What about successful merchants, bankers, and industrialists who were bachelors? Throughout history, trade and finance have been avenues to immense wealth. Many men, unmarried or not, built vast fortunes through shrewd business practices, innovation, and risk-taking. For some of these bachelors, their singular focus on their businesses, unburdened by immediate family demands, may have even contributed to their financial success. They could dedicate all their energy and capital to their enterprises, reinvesting profits and expanding their empires. These men were powerful economic forces in their communities, commanding significant resources and employing many people. Their unmarried status was often incidental to their financial success, not a symptom of their struggle. A wealthy merchant bachelor could control vast sums of money, ships, and goods, demonstrating significant financial prowess. Even among professionals, many bachelors achieved significant financial success. Doctors, lawyers, influential scholars, and successful artists could earn substantial incomes and accumulate considerable wealth. Their bachelor status might have allowed them to save more, invest more aggressively, or pursue careers that required extensive travel or unconventional hours, which might be difficult for married men. For instance, a highly sought-after physician or legal expert, perhaps traveling to different cities for consultations, could command high fees and build a substantial fortune, living a very comfortable life. Of course, it's true that for the working classes, poverty was a major barrier to marriage. Many men simply could not earn enough to support a wife and children, and so they remained unmarried out of economic necessity. This was a widespread phenomenon, but it does not mean that all bachelors were poor. The stereotype mistakenly conflates one reason for bachelorhood with a universal financial condition. In summary, the financial status of historical bachelors was as diverse as that of any other group in society. While some remained unmarried due to poverty, many others were exceedingly wealthy, financially independent, and economically powerful. Their bachelor status did not automatically consign them to financial struggle. Often it was a reflection of their chosen lifestyle, professional dedication, or inherited privilege, all of which could coexist with immense prosperity. Number 1. They lived short, miserable lives. This is arguably the most dramatic and negative stereotype, suggesting that a life without marriage for historical men was inherently truncated, unhappy, and filled with regret. This is a profound misreading of history, projecting modern biases and romantic ideals onto past lives. While historical life expectancies were generally lower for everyone compared to today, and life could be hard for many, there is no historical evidence to suggest that bachelors universally lived shorter or more miserable lives than their married counterparts. In fact, many historical bachelors lived long, fulfilling, and able lives. Firstly, the idea of miserable is highly subjective. As we've explored, many bachelors found immense happiness and purpose in their work, their friendships, their intellectual pursuits, and their contributions to society. Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and countless other figures found deep satisfaction in their respective fields. Their lives were rich with discovery, creativity, and intellectual engagement. To label these lives as miserable simply because they lacked a marital partner is to impose a very narrow definition of happiness and fulfillment. They experienced joy, triumphs, setbacks, and meaningful connections, just like any other human being. Their sense of purpose was often rooted in their non-marital pursuits. Secondly, life expectancy in historical periods was influenced by a myriad of factors far more significant than marital status: sanitation, nutrition, disease, warfare, access to medicine, and general living conditions. While modern sociological studies sometimes show a slight longevity advantage for married men in industrialized nations, applying these findings anachronistically to pre-modern societies is problematic. In historical contexts, bachelors were not necessarily at a disadvantage regarding health or longevity compared to married men, especially if they were part of wealthy or elite groups who had better access to food, cleaner environments, and medical care. A wealthy bachelor living in a country estate might have enjoyed a longer and healthier life than a married peasant struggling in poverty. Consider the long and productive lives of many famous historical bachelors. Isaac Newton lived to be 84, an extraordinary age for the late 17th and early 18th centuries, during which time average life expectancy was much lower. His life was filled with intellectual triumphs and significant contributions to science. Leonardo da Vinci lived to 67, a good age for the Renaissance period, his life packed with unparalleled artistic and scientific innovation. These men were neither short-lived nor miserable. They were titans of their age, living full and awful lives that stretched well beyond the average. Their unmarried status did not shorten their days or diminish their accomplishments. Furthermore, some of the very factors that led to bachelorhood might, in certain circumstances, have even contributed to longevity or a less miserable existence. For example, men who chose celibacy in religious orders often lived in relatively structured, clean, and disciplined environments with regular meals and community support, which could be conducive to health in an era of widespread hardship. They might have avoided the risks associated with childbirth for their partners or the economic strain of supporting a large family. While not a guarantee, these were factors that could positively influence well-being. The stereotype also ignores the individual variation that existed within all historical groups. Just as some married people had short, miserable lives due to disease, poverty, or conflict, and others had long, happy ones, the same was true for bachelors. Their experiences were diverse, shaped by their social class, profession, geographical location, personal choices, and individual temperaments, not simply their marital status. The notion that bachelorhood automatically led to a universally dismal existence is a simplistic and inaccurate narrative. Many historical bachelors carved out lives of profound meaning, purpose, and contentment, challenging the idea that marriage was the sole path to a long and happy life.